everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Free Rotation podcast, the Unsolved Mysteries Edition.
This one's pretty solved.
No, it is a debated solved. And I will say this, only 10 of the 28 were solved, allegedly. The other, 10 were not.
18, but okay.
18, I mathed. Hey, guys. It's me, I'm Becky, and I'm joined with Angie.
Hello.
And Chris.
Hola.
And if you're asking what we're talking about, today we are leaving the beautiful Australian beaches in 1947.
48.
That number. And we are heading to the beautiful country of the United States, specifically Georgia, specifically Atlanta, specifically in 1979. And today we are talking about the Atlanta child murders.
Deuces up, A-Town down, ho.
Yeah. Something that's a little bit more locally known. Actually, it's funny. A lot of people don't know about the Atlanta child murders.
Well, most people aren't old enough to know about it. Again, this is 1980.
But it's one of those things where the 80s were so known for the serial killer era, especially with the Night Stalker and the Hillside Stranglers. But this was kind of lost into and I know what you're going to say, but it was kind of lost into the ether of serial killers. Yes, and you can go ahead and say it. I mean, it's definitely something that's a big topic about it.
The gentleman they arrested had a slightly different skin tone than Jeffrey Dahmer and...
Richard Ramirez and all of them, yeah. Yeah, the thing is, with these murders, it was a hot button topic, especially in Atlanta. And it happened between 1979 and 1981. The Atlanta child murders kind of... It's an interesting time period because what we're looking at is we have a lot of missing children who it takes weeks to find. Critical consensus between all of the murders is that these children and then later some adults that were involved who were kind of linked into it, they were all left in an abandoned lot or the abandoned forest or somewhere that their body would not be immediately abandoned forest.
The abandoned forest.
I guess the state park wouldn't be abandoned technically.
No. It's not
when I say an abandoned area.
It's an abandoned forest. I'm just going to go put down roots in the abandoned forest.
They weren't buried or thrown into... a couple of them were thrown into the water, but they weren't, buried.
Yeah, it was somewhere where their bodies were kind of left in the open, but
where
it was
abandoned in the forest.
Yeah, that's better wording. Thanks. Words are my job. Anyways, so there's a lot of debate about what exactly occurred during those 2 years because the biggest hot button contention at the time in which they weren't being solved is because these children were considered poor, they were black, and they were from the projects in Atlanta. So there wasn't a lot of attention put on them, and a lot of the links that weren't necessarily seen until much later, until the parents of these kids who were going missing started...
they joined up.
Basically joined up.
Yeah, they formed a militia.
Yeah. A task force finally was put together in order to solve these murders. But, it took at least a year before any of that happened. But sort of to start from the beginning, in 1979, and this was in October, the first child who goes missing, he ends up being found in an abandoned area with a gunshot wound. The thing about Atlanta at the time in which all of this is occurring is Atlanta has the highest crime rate in the United States at this time, but specifically for homicide. It actually even outclassed Los Angeles at one point, especially during this time period. So what you are seeing is in these areas that are predominantly black and predominantly poor, it's becoming a thing where they just think, okay, this is, a one and done. It's gang violence. It's shootings. It's just...
They thought it was black on black crime.
Exactly.
And ignored it.
Right.
I'll be honest. The part that it does play a huge role in this case is the fact that it was post-Civil War or post-Civil rights Atlanta.
Yeah.
And it was predominantly the black community. So a lot of cops just didn't pay any attention to it. Mm-hmm. They were like, yeah, he'll be back or whatever. They ran. A poor black child ran off. He'll be back.
Yeah.
That's kind of how they looked at it.
That was a lot of the very initially on the cases that were happening. These children were, I think, under the age of 10. Most of them were under the age of 15.
Yeah, they were all around 9 to 12.
And they would just go missing. A lot of these kids were, they were from poor families, and it would be that they would just be running to the store to pick up cigarettes for their a neighbor or something. And then they would just go missing. So a parent would report them missing. But law enforcement would really not take any consideration into where these kids were going until weeks later when these bodies are found. And a lot of these stories, there's 28 tied murders to what the Atlanta child murders are, but a lot of them are unresolved, and a lot of them have undetermined causes of death because of how long the body had been left out before being discovered. The biggest thing that happens at this point is that there is an inconsistent manner of death in a lot of these cases. Initially, what we see generally is for the kids that are tied together is that they're strangled and their bodies are dumped in a secondary location from their murder site in these areas that are pretty remote. But we do have a lot of similarities where we have kids under the age of 15, a lot of black young men. But what we do see is that some of the cases that are linked are manners of death can be, they were shot in the back. Mm-hmm. There were some girls that were also involved. And then in the latter part of the 1981 killings, it's adults that are linked into this. And there's some debate as to why they're linked, and we'll kind of get into that. But that's mostly why we end up with 28. And at some points in in 1980, there's a body a week that is being discovered that's being linked to this. And it's the first time in probably Atlanta's history that we're seeing what appears to be a serial killer that's kind of working with a manner of death in a very similar situation. So it was a big deal in Atlanta at the time.
And to put you kind of towards what people were feeling, there's a local rock station here that existed then called 96 Rock, that every time they found another body, they would go on the radio and play Another One Bites the Dust. Those DJs actually lost their jobs over that, but that's kind of, and again, this was Georgia in the early 80s.
Yeah.
That was kind of the sentiment. Like, the white suburbs just didn't give a shit.
No.
Like, and a lot of the cops just kind of didn't care.
Well, it was to the point where the mayor of Atlanta at the time was getting inundated with calls and concerns from these parents saying, you have got to investigate this. We have children that are going missing, that these kids are A students. They are not your typical gangbangers.
These kids aren't running away.
Yeah, they're not running away. They have a good home life. Even if they are poor, what one mother described it as, that we were poor in our pockets, but we were rich in our love. And we had a strong family, and it would not make sense for her son to have been running away.
Not only that, but one of the things that eventually got the cops involved was they stopped looking at it as black-on-black crime or gang violence, because typically with gang violence, wherever you kill them is where they die. They're just left there. You don't pick them up, move them,
because you need people to see that, hey, we killed this motherfucker, we'll kill you too.
That is one of the things that finally got, and it wasn't just the cops, but the FBI got involved.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That was one of the things that got them involved, was they were looking at it and like, this isn't gang violence.
Yeah.
This is something else.
Yeah, the cops didn't really get involved until the FBI came down.
Yeah.
And it's also important to note that this was Atlanta's first black mayor.
Yes.
So there was a lot of, politics surrounding these as well.
Yeah. It's also important to note in talking about, especially the crime with looking at it, the crimes and how they could not relate to gang violence and stuff like that. When the FBI got involved, and GBI was actually involved in it too, they were talking about when you see children who are killed, generally in any circumstance prior to, if it's not involving a gunshot and all that stuff, when it involves actual violence,
that's
kids,
where you find them.
You find them there. They're not taken to a secondary location and dumped off. It's sort of the same circumstance with the strangulation issue. You really see strangulation when it comes to Caucasians doing it. You don't see that in a lot of black on black crime.
Well, and initially the FBI thought it was a white guy.
Right.
They initially thought it was a 20 to 30-year-old white male that was doing this, until the FBI, basically the guy from like the behavioral analyst, came down, and he was in the car with two cops, and they drove him into one of the neighborhoods that these kids were being abducted from. And as soon as they drove into the neighborhood, he said everything stopped. The people that were playing dominoes stopped playing dominoes. The kids that were skipping rope stopped skipping rope. Everything stopped, and everybody was looking at him, and he was confused. And he asked the cops, he's like, why is everybody staring at me? And they're like, oh, you're white. And white people don't come into this neighborhood. And when that happened, the guy was like, it has to be a black guy taking these kids.
Yeah.
Because everybody would notice a white guy come through here.
Right.
He would not be able to slip in and out and with a child. It
right.
would have to be someone that's from their community.
Right. This is one of the first cases. That's actually an important thing to note, is one of the first cases that FBI profiling was used. Because initially, it was very early on into the case, They suspected it was a race war, that they thought it was white on black crime, and that these kids were being abducted by racists, and this was all that was happening. It was to the point that at one point there was an unrelated incident where a daycare exploded, killing some kids and a teacher, that people were about to form a militia and go after these people because they were so convinced it was a race war and that incident was related to these child murders, that it could only be a race war. And it wasn't until the FBI got involved and said, listen, it's a man who probably is most likely black.
He blends into the community.
And he blends in, and kids are comfortable with him. Yep. It has to be somebody that they would be comfortable going with, because we have kids that are disappearing off the streets.
They're being transported in a vehicle.
Right.
That's the thing, is it had to be somebody that they were comfortable getting in a car with. And he himself, as an FBI behavioral guy, as soon as he got on that strip, he was like, they would not get in a white guy's car.
I mean, they literally said, it's because you're a honky.
Yeah.
Like, that was the statements from law
the
enforcement.
cops, they're like, you're a honky. They're watching you.
Yeah. So what we have, literally, we have these kids disappearing for 2 years. And it, like I stated previously, it wasn't until 1980 when we're starting to see what they call, say, a body a week, that a task force is formed with local law enforcement, APD, GBI, FBI, who actually start investigating this, because the sentiment was that our kids are disappearing and nobody cares.
Nobody did.
Nobody did.
You have to remember, the FBI usually doesn't get involved unless the state asks them, or it's something terrorist related.
And that goes back to Angie's point. This was a lot of politics involved in this. And I mean, you have your first black mayor.
Yeah, and this was still the time before the KKK was disbanded, legally. So you have this big power, especially here in the state of Georgia, that is the KKK. Mm-hmm. I mean, even to this day, the white supremacists have a big seat of power here.
Right. But so they didn't start. So there was investigations that were occurring, and into 1981, you're still seeing these kids going missing. But there's not a lot of evidence to go off of what's happening, because I mean, what's being left, the bodies are being left. The only thing that they're finding consistently is fiber on these bodies. So they're looking at like the shoes of these kids and seeing loose fiber.
And dog hair.
And it's like a red fiber. Like,
yeah, it was a green and yellow fiber.
Okay, yeah. They keep finding it, but it's on all of them.
Yeah. And it's like, and when we say all of them, there's probably about 10 that we're seeing at this point. Some kids are linked into this just because of some of the similarities, but at least 10 of these kids who were involved had these fibers on them that were consistent, but they couldn't figure out where it was coming from.
It was like a coarse. It looks weird when you actually see them, when they show them to you. It's like a coarse thread, weird.
Yeah,
stuff.
and they said it was like only 1,600 like versions of, or like. It was a rare enough that it wasn't something that you would consistently see, because whoever made it only made a certain amount, but they were consistently seeing it, but had no way to link it back to anybody. So in 1981, what ends up happening is the FBI starts, let me back up. During this time, they're starting to release information to the press. What's going on? Hey, we're finding these kids in abandoned lots. They're being abandoned into remote areas. So what they start to see is that the way people are being left at this point is they're not being dumped in these lots anymore. They're being dumped in bodies of water. So they keep consistently now finding bodies in like the Chattahoochee or in other rivers around the Atlanta area.
But it was all around this one part of Atlanta. It wasn't like he was driving 30 miles outside Atlanta.
No.
It was all within this like little 5-mile stretch.
Right. Well, and which was all within the same area in which the bodies were initially being dumped at.
Yep.
So the FBI at that point, with local law enforcement, start doing stakeouts at rivers, because they think if it's going to continue to happen, they'll find somebody who kind of meets that, or there would be somebody there during the night that should not be there in the first place.
And they literally have guys hiding in bushes near these bridges. Like, just waiting to see what happens.
Yeah.
They're not like parked in a car where you can see them. They're legit hiding in the bushes waiting to catch this asshole.
Yeah. So it's over a course of a few days. They have this, and this to me is the craziest part of this story, is on the last day of their stakeout, probably within the last 2 hours, they are staking this out. A law enforcement officer states that he hears what sounds like something being thrown into the river. He doesn't see anything. He doesn't note anything that's obvious that of something being dumped in the river. But he hears the splash. So then he calls up to his
he radios the guy in the bush.
Yeah, and he's basically like, "Hey, something sounds like something just dropped in the water." And so they start to look, and they see a white, I think it was a Chevrolet. I believe it's a Chevrolet, driving down, and it's like 3:00 in the morning.
Yeah, they see him actually turning around.
Yeah. He starts driving forward, and then he does a weird U-turn and comes back again.
And they're like, there's taillights.
Yeah.
And then they turn around.
Yeah. And this is like at 3:00 in the morning. Nobody should be out near the Chattahoochee at this time of night, just kind of hanging out by a bridge. We'll get into all of this a little bit, but it's just weird as shit at this point. They stop the car, and it's a guy by the name of Wayne Williams. Wayne Williams is this black guy who is from Atlanta, lives in Atlanta, and he states, the first thing he says to law enforcement when they stop him is this about those black boys that have been going missing? And law enforcement think that's a little weird, but he states that he's meeting a woman because he's a self-proclaimed like talent agent
for like music.
Yeah,
he's like in the music biz, but he's not in the music biz. He just says he is.
Yeah, and he's going to meet this woman. I think he said by the name of Sharon Johnson, and he was just trying to figure out where her address was located so he could meet with her because he has a meeting at 6:00 in the morning. Well, everybody's kind of like, well, that's weird. So law enforcement starts to look into it. Nobody by that name is found in the area in which he stays.
You would have been better saying you were there to buy drugs.
Yeah, abso-freaking-lutely.
Yeah.
Musicians play at night. What musician are you going to meet at 6 a.m.?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Or just say, I've been looking for a house for 30 minutes. She just finished a gig. I'm heading over there now.
Exactly.
You might as well said I'm looking for a comedian at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
They're all asleep.
There's a lot of words you could have.
I'm looking for a vampire who rises at dawn.
Yeah, okay, it's crazy. And like he basically states the same. They can never find this woman. At one point, a law enforcement officer states that he sees what appears to be a nylon rope in the back seat of the car. But at that time, they don't really have even probable cause to stop this guy at this point, so they let him go. Well, now they have a name, Wayne Williams. They start to investigate this guy. Part of that investigation is looking into into his story about this person that he was going to meet.
Sharon Johnson.
So Sharon Johnson. Hey, the address he gave, there's no Sharon Johnson located there. They keep investigating him, kind of looking into it, and they do end up getting a search warrant for his house. And what they find is that these green and yellow fibers that showed up on the children match similarly to stuff that's in his house. Now, what is also happening subsequent to all of this stuff is that simultaneous to all of this, another body has been found in the river where he had been driving by that night. And it's a guy, it's an older gentleman, is shorter in stature. They say that if you looked at him, he could kind of come off as a kid. But there's statements made that Wayne Williams actually was seen with this man the night prior to him going missing, holding hands with him at the Rialto in Atlanta. And so there's a connection there. So they start questioning him about this missing man and who they find. And he says, I don't know him. Well, it's inconsistent because there's an eyewitness statement saying that he was seen holding hands with this guy. And my thing is, like, this is when the stories sort of start, to me, becoming gray. I know a lot of people have said that the murders have been solved because, we got the fiber evidence.
And they stopped once we arrested him.
They stopped, yeah. Basically, that part, all that stuff. But it's when this kind of starts happening that you're like, I can kind of see why it's easy to say that he may not have done it. Moving into it, he gets arrested. They have really what the evidence is based on is this eyewitness about the guy that was found in the river who has now been linked to these Atlanta child murders. And there are 10 of the 28 that have these similar fibers that were found in Wayne Williams' home and in his car at the same time. So this is what the prosecution bases their entire case on, pretty much.
Yeah, it's pretty circumstantial.
It's pretty circumstantial.
Well, and the dog hair, like, they did a DNA, and we'll get into it. In 2019, Keisha Bottoms had more DNA sampling run, and the dog hair did relate back to his dog. However, it also related back to like 10,000 other species. So it's still circumstantial.
Very circumstantial. I mean, it's a huge trial. I mean, really, they're banking on this eyewitness statement that says that he was with this one guy the night it happens. Previous to that, there's another man that is killed, similar in age, similar MO with the same fibers. And then the trial itself is a real, like, I wish you could just do an entire episode about the trial, because not only does it fall in the circumstantial evidence, the judge allows evidence from the 10 other unsolved cases involving the fiber to be put into evidence, which this blows my mind.
Well, why don't we do a 2-parter? We build up to the trial, and then we'll do the trial and beyond.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay.
So, I mean, really what we're looking at right now is we're sort of moving toward the trial, and they have linked him to at least 10 of those other children who have similar fibers on it.
Now, you might be listening thinking, well, that seems pretty cut and dried, except there's some mud in the water.
Yeah.
Because you might also wonder, how exactly did the FBI come to be involved? Well, because when you talk about, gang-related activities, the KKK is considered not maybe along the same lines of the gang.
But they're a terrorist organization.
Yes. So they're watched very closely. Now, you have this guy in the organization who had, when the first boy killed, had a run-in with him because the kid backed his bicycle into his car. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'm going to kill that little motherfucker. I mean, there was, more racist slang used. And then, lo and behold, this little kid dies. And then he tells somebody, yes, I killed, more racist slang. And he says, and I'm going to keep killing them. He's like, I'm going to kill more of them.
Right.
So, and because they're trying to incite a race riot. Because what's the best way to get people to turn against a minority is to make them be, and this is an actual term called the Black Boogeyman. They want to turn them into the Black Boogeyman. Let's start turning people against Black people again, because Atlanta, if you don't know, is really the cradle of where the civil rights movement.
Literally Atlanta's motto for a long time, other than it being the city beneath the trees, is that Atlanta is the city that is too busy to hate. Right. Like, legit, like, you just don't have that. You have much more of a melting pot in this city, especially with the airport and all of that stuff.
Yeah, a lot of Black culture lives here.
Yeah.
You have 2 of the biggest well-known African-American colleges here. And you had Martin Luther King Jr. here.
Yeah.
And Martin Luther King. So they wanted to stir up this race riot, and it was working.
Right.
Because the families in these neighborhoods had literally formed a militia.
Right. And here's the thing. If you look at it, we'll get into a little bit more after the trial, like why people think that maybe he wasn't guilty. I mean, even some of the families of the victims don't believe he was guilty.
Or maybe a lot of people think that they were both killing side by side.
Right.
And
the only reason why I mention this is because some of the witnesses in other cases that are not listed as part of the 10 that were used in Wayne Williams' trial involve a blue car where you see a light-skinned man and a black man getting in and out of a car, or just a light-skinned man in general.
Right. And you have, usually serial killers don't have a different MO. Right. If you want to be face-to-face strangling, you don't normally shoot in the back. Like some of them were shot execution style, some were strangled.
Right. And you really don't, especially like at the time in which we're looking at this, like I said, you're looking at like the Hillside Strangler is going on about simultaneously to the time in which this is happening. Very, very similar MO in their cases. Let me put it, there's 2 of them. Mm-hmm. That you have the same MO, same manner of person. Night Stalker, similar. You don't have the similar like person, but you have the same MO. Somebody breaks in and kills them in a horrific manner. You're seeing different patterns happening with each kid. So there's a question as to whether are all these kids related to the same murderer, or is there a possibility that we have separate things happening at the same time that we're linking together, because there is literally a militia being formed to the fact that these kids are going missing. Mm-hmm.
But there were serial killers who did use different MOs. I mean, even Zodiac would strangle some and shoot some. It just is what it is. They're not all the same. And the way I look at it for the clan leader guy is, if you're a clan leader, what's better than going out and killing minorities? People believing you did without having to actually do it.
Yeah.
You can take credit for all the murders of whatever minorities you want. If people actually believe you did it, it's the same as you actually doing it.
I was thinking, like, there's a kid in the neighborhood. And, I mean, he's a white kid. But he's constantly running his bike into my car.
Sure.
And I'm always like, I'm going to kill that little motherfucker one day. If he were to die, somebody might be like, you know what? I heard my neighbor say she's going to kill that little motherfucker.
Well, I mean, it's just, especially back then, if you could get in his position, if you could get credit for killing
a
black child without actually having to do it, that has to be the perfect scenario for him, right?
Yeah.
Like,
because I mean, initially what we're looking at very early on is that this is a race war. It's our children going missing. We have a city that doesn't give a shit by all intents and purposes.
Yeah, but you're also looking at one side of it that really wants a race war to happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can, even if you don't have to do it, if you could take credit for it and incite that kind of violence,
yeah,
you just do
no,
it.
that's true.
Right.
Yeah,
And
it's
now,
just the perfect scapegoat.
Now, I mean,
and you achieve your goal.
When the FBI finally did come out with the profile, I mean, they came out with a profile about a year afterwards. It did kind of simmer it down, but there are still people who think that part of that is that there was killings happening, or there was some sort of racial thing going on.
And if they had come out and said, "Yeah, we think it's this white man killing," even half would be 14, black children. Yeah, you're not.
It would have got hairy.
Yeah.
Atlanta would have burned to the ground.
Yeah,
absolutely. It would have been I mean, you're talking about a city that, even aside from the Sherman marching and the carpetbaggers and.
Especially in 1980s.
Reconstruction.
Well, you look at Atlanta in the late 70s, early 80s, it was primarily African-American.
Yeah.
Most of the white people lived in the suburbs.
Or rural.
Yeah.
Like very rural type places.
Most of the black people lived in Atlanta. It's where, again, there were manufacturing jobs. It's where a lot of people lived. Especially if you were poor and didn't make a bunch of money, there was always a job. If you didn't have property, you didn't have acreage, that's kind of what you had to do. Mm-hmm. It is what it is. Atlanta's not that way anymore. Now it's... I couldn't get everybody. There's no predominant race in Atlanta anymore. It's everybody you can imagine and everybody else you can imagine.
Right.
And it's different.
It's that way now because this is, I know, if you've listened to us in any length, you've heard me discuss systemic racism. And part of that is if you want to make parts of a city affordable, you move in your poor people and you keep them there. You drive all the prices down, and then you kick them out, you sell it cheap, you build it up. And then the slums get smaller and smaller, worse and worse. You can't put jobs there because you need it to go down into just dirt cheap so you can buy it up and then put jobs there.
Right.
So the poor's just kept poor, and a lot of people don't realize that, but that's the truth of it.
Right. And especially at that time when we are coming out of the whole civil rights movement, all of that stuff, and the stereotype is you have black kids run away. That's it.
That's what these cops thought.
Yeah. There's nothing you can do. So
they don't care.
So what we end up having is here's the thing. I do think Wayne Williams was involved with those two, and we'll get into the trial, but the two homicides. But I think that Atlanta was I think there was so much upset about the way it was handled early on that all of these people, all of these cases had to be linked together so they could lump it together and close it and be done with it.
So if that is the case, and that's what we end up with, it's either the smartest serial killer ever who just stopped, which they can't.
Right.
That's just not part of that's not how their brains work. And even if, the way I look at it, even if it was the Klan guy.
Why did he stop?
Yeah, he wouldn't have stopped.
Well, here's the thing. We don't know if it stopped. We only know that it stopped, but we don't know if other kids went missing and their bodies were found a few weeks later and they just didn't link it to anybody because the reports were that this guy has been arrested, he has been convicted, and we can relate him back to it. We don't have that information.
But at this point, I think it's been researched so much that even reporters have gone into neighboring communities and been like, hey, was there any kids missing? Any show up? They did that with they've done it with every serial killer. Zodiac, they've gone back to 1959 where he probably started in California or New York were his first two. So I really think if it continued at this point, the reporters would have found it. They'd have found, if it happened in DeKalb County, they'd have been like, there were 3 kids missing in DeKalb that turned up 3 weeks later. Exactly the same.
I see that, but I also see it from my perspective as a prosecutor that if people don't think to look for, like you have a kid who's, let's say he is a runaway. We have runaways all the time. Constantly. And they just disappear and nobody thinks to look for them. Hey, maybe that is a kid who did get murdered.
Yeah, I get it then, but now, with as much as it's been gone over and the reporters have gone back and looked through everything, I think they would have found him.
Maybe. I don't know. We just have so many of them that were undetermined as to their cause of death that they could just be completely unrelated. I mean, it could be that there was somebody else, or it could be that there was another serial killer. I don't know. It's just, there's not enough information to me as a prosecutor. I see the 2 murders, and like I said, we can do a whole episode on the trial. I can see that, but I can also see where you will never reach beyond a reasonable doubt on those other kids. I don't think you can.
Well, you can't, because the whole trial was circumstantial regardless.
Right.
However, even if he wasn't doing it and it all just stopped anyways,
kind of worked out.
Job well done.
I mean, good job, buddies. But yeah, I think it's important. I think, to me, the trial is a big, especially for somebody like me who this is my job. The trial and how it was handled and the evidence is such a huge. It's I don't know what's the word. A huge
clusterfuck.
It's a clusterfuck, but it's more like it's one of those things where, as somebody who sees this every single day, it's like the way it was handled is not the way it should have been handled.
And here's the way I look at it. You're looking at it through 2018 through 2022 eyes.
Yeah.
You're not looking through 1980.
And I agree with that.
Eyes.
Yeah, and that's the truth. But I think it is important to sort of kind of break down what we saw, like what happened, what we saw, and how it probably wasn't going to be handled like that. But it also relates, once again, it's a chain. To me, it's like a lightning. What is it? A chain lightning. When something happens, it causes a chain reaction.
Yeah, chain reaction.
I was trying to think it was like a red magic card, and I couldn't remember what it was called. Mm-hmm. It's a chain reaction. You have the reactions of what's happening, and this is also reactionary to what had happened.
And I also think that the way I look at it is, in the communities, had it continued, they wouldn't have been quiet about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're dealing with parents losing their kids.
Yeah.
I don't think they would have just shut up because they arrested somebody. I think that would have been like, hey, my kid's missing.
Well, and we'll get into it, but even some of the parents don't believe that he was the killer.
That's true, but some people are stupid.
Yeah, well, a lot of the parents, even the parents, like the parents who have kids who were not, they did not try and convict him. That's what a lot of parents are upset about.
And we're talking like he did get convicted of these murders, and he did not.
That's what I'm saying, and that's another thing we need to talk about.
He's still in jail.
On the part 2. Because we need to talk about the fact that he was only convicted on 2 double homicides of adults.
Of the adults.
Yeah, and he's still in jail.
Yes,
that's why we consider this the unsolved child murders, because he was never convicted.
Yeah. I mean, they believe they solved it.
He was never even tried.
Nope. There was no evidence for it.
Yeah. But we can get into that next week.
But the child murder stopped, and that's good enough.
Yeah, the child murder stopped, we think.
You know, and I was alive back then.
I was not.
I mean, I was a kid. I was 6 years old. And here's the thing. This was also the same time that the interstate killer was killing people. Atlanta was really crazy at this time. There was a lot of murdering going on.
Yeah, it was there. Like I said, it was there was the highest homicide rate in the country was in Atlanta at the time this was happening.
Like, we go visit Atlanta. A good amount.
Nothing to it.
Not back then. You didn't. You stayed away.
Even then, I mean, my parents lived here, which we live within 50 miles of Atlanta. And, like, they didn't go to Atlanta on the weekends.
No.
That wasn't a thing. Mm-mm. Like, now if I want to go to Atlanta for lunch, it's like, okay, I'm going to...
Even the Braves played on this side of Atlanta.
Well, the Atlanta Braves were technically in Fulton County, but they were not in Atlanta.
No.
Yeah, they were not in the parts that were problematic.
Fulton County Stadium is in Fulton County, but just barely.
Yeah. Just barely.
And I mean, I mean, you have to really set the scene of what we're looking at, especially for, I mean, we talk now because there's like an atrocious amount of murders that happen in Atlanta every year. And Atlanta is not a safe place. It is a hub of gang violence, and there is a ton of shootings all the time. But what we saw in the 80s
is a different animal.
It pales in comparison. Mm-hmm. And what you have now is it's gang on gang violence in Atlanta. Rarely do you hear about somebody who's just walking down the street and gets shot.
Right.
Because
and this was also when they were finding all the dead bodies off of I-85 and 75. Just killed. There you go.
You have fools shooting at each other, but not just randos.
Right. Yeah. You're not just for the funsies.
And you don't even hear about a lot of like muggings in Atlanta anymore. Like
no, I mean when you hear about an armed robbery, it gets reported on the news now because it's such a atrocious crime that happens. But you don't hear about it as much. Now people break into cars and stuff like that. That's always going to be a thing.
Yeah, but if you hear about if somebody gets carjacked at like on Ponce, it's making the news.
It is. Back in the day, though,
No one cared.
nobody gave a shit.
Yeah.
It was
Oh,
the
they
Wild
stole your
West.
car, but you're alive? Walk home, homie.
Yeah. So, but yeah, we can.
What were you doing in Atlanta anyway? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing that it's hard to set a scene of that, especially
Even into the 90s, you would think like, and I was a teenager in the 90s, we'd go to Atlanta a lot, and I would tell my dad I was going to Underground, and he would be horrified. He's like, you're going to get murdered.
yeah.
I'm like, it's not, what are you talking about? It's a bunch of white church ladies that are buying stuff.
Yeah.
They have a Triceratops head in one of these, or skull in one of these shops for $300,000.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? And he's like, you don't understand what it used to be like.
Yeah.
Like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
you just didn't
You
go
just
to
didn't
Atlanta.
go.
Listen,
I'm going
I mean,
to JR Crickets to have a burger.
yeah, now,
What?
I mean, legitimately, like, I mean, up until
The world of Coke is there. The aquarium.
it really is only. I would say it's probably been within the last 30
years.
years that people like Atlanta is now a hub of like. You want to go there because it's the place. It's cultural. It's diverse. You have some great places to visit. And here's the thing: I love Atlanta. Don't get me wrong. Like Atlanta is always going to be my city. You just have to understand that at the time we're looking at, it was just a different place.
But if you're trying to get to Georgia State and you were given the wrong exit,
can we not talk about that ever
you
again?
could die. You
Okay,
could still die.
I didn't. I told. Okay,
Georgia State's huge. How'd you get the wrong exit?
coming
did.
off the interstate, I gave her the wrong exit
She said
number.
keep right at the fork
sent her,
instead of left.
I sent her down by Turner Field, like.
Oh, yeah. Henry Aaron and all
Yeah,
that good
the
stuff.
the neighborhoods around.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Oh, I know.
It was not a safe place.
So they've also, and I mean, I hate to say it, but they've also began, a lot of those neighborhoods are being redone already.
Yeah,
And they're kicking the poor people out.
yeah.
And you can see it when they did it in Decatur and
I mean, that's sort of what's happening with Atlanta now. Is like the poor parts of Atlanta are very poor.
and they'll move them all into the section that they want to drive prices down on, so they can come in and buy it dirt cheap.
I think a great example is looking at the Beltline.
Decatur.
Decatur.
Go to Decatur.
Yeah, Decatur's a great example. But we went to my brother's graduation, and you could see where the belt, like they were trying to redevelop it, but it was in not a very safe area. But that's how you drive the prices up. You buy the cheapest area, and then you turn it into some like brewery. Let's ride our bicycles around this kind of place and drive up the prices.
They're forced.
there's a lot of hipster white people.
That's what I'm saying. I was like, this is horrific.
And then you drive them and you drive the poor into another part of town
That's also
that you want to drive the prices down on. And that's what we mean when we say systemic poverty, systemic racism.
Yeah.
It's not about, I hate the color of your skin. We're talking about...
It's profit.
Yeah.
They're just looking at how to make a profit.
Yeah.
I mean, 20 years ago, I could have bought a lot of Decatur for $200,000.
Yeah.
Most of that town.
Now Decatur is like...
I can't buy an apartment in Decatur for $200,000.
Now that is like, that's the city you walk around in if you want to go into cute little boutique shops and all that stuff. We went up to Decatur to go to like a ghost hunting thing, and I probably hadn't been in Decatur in like 15 years. And I'm like, what the fuck has happened?
White ladies with stupid hats and puffy dogs.
I was about to say, I'm like, this is not the Decatur I remember. This is a very different Decatur.
Even
Marietta's the same way.
Marietta's different because it's so much commercial.
Yes.
That you can't really
But
do
it
so
used
well.
to not be like that.
No, but it is a lot of factories and a lot of buildings and a lot of, there's not as much residential as there was in Decatur because there wasn't anything else in Decatur.
Right.
But you look at like, and that's what, when I was a kid, we'd go to Little Five because it was like, I was a little punker and that's where you went.
Yep.
When I was 16. And you're talking 98, 99. And it was dirt cheap and there were gutter punks and kids with Liberty spikes and weird girls and bondage stuff everywhere, and it was a great scene. And now you go to Little Five and there's hipsters and there's heroin homeless, and everything is 17 times more expensive than it should be, and it sucks because it used to be you could go to I'll mention the store if you've been in Atlanta, Junkman's Daughter, and everything was dirt cheap.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now I go in there and I'm like, I look at something and I look it up on my phone and I'm like, oh, this is 4 times what they're asking for it on Amazon.
To me, it's crazy. We used to always go to Junkman's Daughter for like costume stuff and just going to hang out and go like eat over there. And now it's like they want to be so like high end boutique stuff, but it's like you're fucking Junkman's Daughter.
Yeah.
Like the point of view was
Junkman's part of Junkman's Daughter.
Yeah, it it was fun to go in here because of the shit you would find in here.
They used to have awesome thrift stores up there.
Yes.
And now it's all like, hey, do you want this nice 1970s jean jacket I found? It's $700. I'm like, oh, we can keep that shit.
Yeah.
That's not why I
Meanwhile,
come.
you can go to the Goodwill 3 blocks down and probably find it for
Which is
$16.
What they do.
Yeah.
They just bring it in and stick a tire tag on it.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I understand why it happens. It just hurts my soul.
It does.
It hurts my soul that I used to be able to go to like Little Five Pizza and get a slice and a Coke for like $3.99.
Yeah, walk into the Vortex and get a hamburger and a shake.
Yeah.
And some fries, and it's still under $7. Now it's
15.
You may as well go to Fogo.
And good luck trying to find parking to get over there.
Well, it used to be. I mean, even as far back as I can remember, on the weekends it was still paid parking, but during the week it wasn't.
Right.
And even with paid parking, like if you knew the attendant, be like, "Hey, man," he'd be like, "All right."
Yeah,
and you just go park.
And like
no
paid parking wasn't like it was.
They would literally sit there and drink.
Yeah.
And take your money.
Yeah,
now it's a business.
They sat in lawn chairs and got
Yeah.
hammered
Yeah.
during the day. I'm not even sure they actually had paid parking.
I mean,
or that guy lived down the
That's
street.
exactly.
And was like,
We made that joke all the time. We're like, "Hey, dude, do
$5.
we actually have to pay you?" He'd be like, "Nah, you're good."
Yeah.
I'm like, "That's not fucking work. Like that you don't work here."
No.
But now it's like an entire business where you have to pay, and then you only have a certain amount of time, and now you can get
That's
towed
right.
off of it.
It's timed paid parking.
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
There used to be a spot you could park and then walk through the fence to get
Oh,
around.
yeah.
I remember all of it. But now it's like,
And now if you park at the Indian supermarket, they will tow you.
Absolutely.
If you don't go into their store.
And it's just harsh. Like,
It's bad.
progress is different. And even back then, I mean, I'm different too, so it sucks. Like, I would never have wore like polos and slacks back then. I mean,
But the man takes you down. Listen, I didn't think I'd be wearing business suits.
Texas are motherfucker. They just never stop. But even then, like, I don't see, like, when I go to Little Five anymore, there are no more, like, gutter punks. And
No.
it's all just hipsters.
It's people who want to be like gutter punks and stuff like that, but it's high-end gutter punks.
It's people that are being gutter punks with daddy's money.
Yes.
Which is a different animal altogether.
It's absolutely the truth.
And they're paying ungodly amounts of money to live near Little Five in these crappy little houses. And I'm like, what?
I know. Listen, the one Atlanta lost me when the original Masquerade was gone. Like, if you can't go to a rock concert and hope that the floor falls on you because the the inspection probably wasn't that good that year, that's not true music scene. Everything's just really changed in Atlanta, and I get it. I mean, you with like the movie business moving in, with there being influx of money, the tourism in it, you want to present the best picture of Atlanta you can present. But what made Atlanta so like
great,
like just fun to be in, like you're the places you knew, like, hey, I could go here because that's like my place, they're gone now.
We went to a concert in Atlanta. And it was, I was probably 17, and it was like a death metal show. And the venue, and I'll use air quotes for venue, was a space, like kind of like an alleyway that was kind of wide, between a Mexican laundry place and a Mexican grocery store. But they had strung lights up and built a stage, and it was fantastic. And I'm like, we're doing this.
I miss the old Music Midtown, like.
On the Rocks?
Yeah,
when I annexed it On the Rocks?
Exactly. Where the fuck did it go?
It's now a hipster thing.
Now it's called Shaky Knees, and it costs $300.
Yeah, I'm good.
I remember
crazy.
You used to be able to go see like legitimate bands at 99X On the Rocks and Music Midtown for free. They'd be like, hey, Weezer's playing tonight. And you would just be like,
oh,
okay.
yeah.
Cool.
Sometimes they just go down to, I can't remember the name of the club. They would just be there. And you just go and listen.
Yeah, it was great. And now, like, everything's ungodly expensive. I haven't been to a free...
Tin Lizzy's, that's it.
Yeah, Tin Lizzy's is great. We used to go to the Drunken Unicorn, which was up on Georgia State, and...
Oh, yeah.
See,
listen, it used to be like you didn't want to go to the Tabernacle. The Tabernacle was not the place you wanted to go to a concert because it was in the bad part of town. Now, I mean, yeah, and Centennial Olympic Park was considered the bad part of town. Now everything is...
Yeah.
It's up. Like, that is the place you want to be if you want to go hang out in downtown.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, anywhere in downtown now. There are no more...
If I couldn't go to Dragon Con and walk in the middle of the street in the middle of the night and not fear for my life, I'm not in Atlanta anymore.
Yeah, that shady edginess that Atlanta used to have is gone.
It is.
And, again, we went to see a concert at the Tabernacle that a girl I used to know took me to, which I didn't care for it at all. But she gave me booze on the way up there, so I was like, yeah, I'll go. So by the time we got there and parked, there was a line around the building to get in. I'm like, I really have to pee. So, and they wouldn't let me in to pee because they weren't letting people in yet. Doors weren't open. So I had to go to like this other building that had like a downstairs basement area, but the door was locked. But it was all concrete, and I was like, well, we're peeing here. So that, I didn't expose myself to the crowd and drivers by, pee in this little sub-alley. And a homeless gentleman runs up and he's like, hey, I know what you're doing. Give me $5 or I'll call the cops. I'm like, dude, call the cops. By the time they get here, I'll be gone. I'll tell them you peed in here.
Yeah.
It's just different.
Oh, you remember the old masquerade? Everybody just went into the field to pee. Yeah. Before they open it, you just go in the field where they'd have the outside concerts. Like,
they had the fence around it.
You just went in there and peed.
Whizzed outside the fence, you're good to go.
Not only that, but it was like everybody pee. You pee out there and then park out there. And it wasn't even like they had like gated or there was a fence around it, but it wasn't like secured parking. It was just like, we have a fence around this field. You want to park? And I'd be like, nah, I'll take my chances with Murder Kroger.
Yeah.
Oh my.
And Murder Kroger.
Murder Kroger, y'all.
That's the thing. Oh my God, Murder Kroger.
I thought they tore it down.
They tore down the masquerade. Did they tear down Murder Kroger?
They tore down Murder.
Actually,
they tore. I don't know if they tore it down.
I think they remodeled it.
They remodeled it, and it's now just a Kroger because they don't want it to be known as. It's still always going to be Murder Kroger.
Yeah, it's Murder Kroger until I die.
Yeah.
My kids will never know about it.
It's literally on Google Maps as Murder Kroger.
Absolutely.
It really is. I still have
so if you were wondering about visiting Atlanta.
And again, I'm not saying I don't love Atlanta because I still do, because there's still great food and there's music that comes through.
Yeah.
But like with everything else, it's not the same as when you're a kid.
No.
Everything changes and sometimes it sucks.
And it's not nearly the terrifying cesspool of horror that it was in the early 80s.
Yeah. We'll wrap it back around to that. Like, it's not, it definitely is not where we are in the context of which we are talking anymore.
No, like, I would feel completely safe walking through Atlanta at any time of the day.
Yeah.
No hesitation, no questions.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, okay, it's Atlanta.
Meanwhile, you were probably going to get robbed in the early 80s.
In the early 80s, you might be murdered.
Just flat out broad daylight.
Yeah, they didn't care.
Carjackings. Like,
they would
you just
shoot you
did
on
not
the street.
do this.
Yeah. I say that I've told people before, in like Griffin, which is South Atlanta, I feel less safe in Griffin than going to Atlanta.
Absolutely.
Like,
I know meth heads that live in Griffin.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that this is also Georgia, late 1970s, early 80s, KKK.
Yep.
So it was just
and we can talk a little bit about that, especially because one of our cases, we had it was a similar thing in the 80s. KKK still prevalent. We had an unsolved murder in my jurisdiction up until 2016, and it happened in the 80s because first off, nobody investigated it.
Nobody cared.
They were the KKK was in law enforcement, and the guy who did it, white guy, said he did it because he was a black guy flirting with his girlfriend. Because
this is also the time period where they're perpetrating the black boogeyman.
Yep. Like,
black people commit all the crimes.
Yep.
And they're really, perpetrating that. The Jews Say No campaign of Nancy Reagan's has just started as criminalizing everything, and
it's like cocaine's
look
illegal.
at all these criminals and stuff, and
it's weird. It's
meanwhile,
very different
bitch,
now.
It was your husband that put it all in.
It was in the early 1900s, like 1920s, when they made cocaine illegal. Not because cocaine's bad and should be illegal, but they thought that black people would start doing cocaine and become unstoppable monsters.
Yeah.
And it's like, come on.
Yeah.
A little snow never hurt anybody. What are we doing to each other?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now they're talking about in Los Angeles doing clinics where you can go do your drugs. Like,
I'm on board with that.
I'm down with it.
Yeah. Pay your fees. Do your drugs. Absolutely.
I like that better than I think Portland's model, which is, we're just going to decriminalize everything in Godspeed. And now it's just homeless camps and drug use everywhere.
Yeah. Here, I mean, in those you regulate it, you have a healthcare worker. That way you can't OD and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And hey, here's the thing. Yeah. And I mean,
and get your taxes.
Like I said, prosecutor
get our
here,
tax money.
Until somebody's ready to get rehabbed,
they're not going
to do it, and you're just going to keep
care.
Yeah.
Because they're getting health care when they're doing it, and they're not getting these weird infections and dying and ODing where we can't get to them. We're not
and sharing needles and spreading
shit. We're not dispatching EMTs to go get these guys out of the street, which is more money that we're having to spend because they're never going to get reimbursed from that. But individual.
I mean, and that's the thing is, like, we're still dealing with the effects of what happened in the 80s, the late 70s, early 80s, and all of that. I mean,
I like with the clinics because if they do want help and they are tired of doing whatever drug of choice they're on, you can have the ability
a social worker to talk with them,
and be like, look, we can get you into a program tomorrow.
Yeah. Things are just different, man. But we can get into okay.
So next week, we're gonna go into the
trial
itself because
dun.
You think you've heard it all.
You think you've heard it all, and I mean, here's the thing. I want to preface this, especially this episode, because I know people are gonna be like, you didn't cover like the murders themselves. There were 28 of them. There have been, if you want to find out about everything that happened throughout that time, the best thing to do is check it out on YouTube. WSB did a great there
have been so many
great documentary on it from Atlanta. CNN's done a documentary.
HBO did
one.
There's been a lot of them.
There's been a lot of them. This is sort of an overview of it because I feel like this is one of those things that people just kind of forget about in the history of unsolved murders, because yes, we can say that it was solved, but there are still several cases that were never solved.
Yeah. Was it HBO or Netflix that had a documentary called The Lost?
I think that was Netflix.
I think
Netflix,
yeah. I know Mindhunter on Netflix also did a thing about Atlanta child murders. And I think it's important just to kind of understand that unsolved murders just doesn't mean that necessarily you have a killer that's never been found. It may be somebody that has been convicted and they think he did it, but has never been convicted of it.
To this day, the mayor, Keisha Bottoms of Atlanta, in 2019 reopened it,
and there is DNA that is still being run through GBI right now about it, because there are still a lot of questions about some of these cases that were not directly linked to Wayne Williams and were not used in his trial, but they are linked to the Atlanta child murders. So we'll see, but we'll get into that next week. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Love y'all.
ATL.
Don't come to Atlanta, we fool.
Straight up. ATL.